read anything before the 20th century, even a little bit of the 20th century, but especially beforehand, that was the primary means of education, was to cultivate virtues alongside of equipping people to think critically and to maybe become an expert on a field.
I was on Harvard's campus a few years ago, and there was a tour going on, and they're at the Harvard statue, and there's some Latin on the side of the Harvard statue, and someone says, so what's the Latin stand for? It's Veritas Christus et Ecclesia, and, truth for Christ and the church. And so he says, it's truth for Christ and the church. But he said it doesn't mean that anymore. And I thought to myself, well, it still means that. You just don't believe it.
Welcome to the Truth in the Public Square podcast, a podcast dedicated to equipping Christians to engage culture and politics for the glory of God and the common good. I'm your host, Harrison Lang. On today's podcast, I am joined by Dr. Melson to discuss the importance of Christian higher education. Dr. Melson is the 26th president of Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri. He has served in this role since September 7th, 2021. Beforehand, he served in various roles in Christian higher education. Dr. Melson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Harrison, thank you for the privilege and the joy to be here. Excited to talk about Christian higher education, and certainly excited to talk about SBU today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. If you wouldn't mind giving a brief further introduction of yourself, update on your current life, your current ministry, and just the Melson family overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are really delighted. We've just finished 5 years here at SBU, which seems incredible. It's been a great 5 years. God's been very kind to us in these 5 years. Been married to a wonderful, incredible wife. My wife's name is Tammy. We've married 38 years. We have 3 kids, one daughter-in-law and one grandson. And so our family's starting to grow a little bit, and we're kind of spread across the country. But it's really been special to be at SBU. I've been in ministry and Christian higher education for 35 years. And the last 5 years being part of SBU has been a real highlight for my own career and my own experience as president. It's something I felt called to be in the seat of university president. God opening that door and opportunity to be here at SBU has been really sweet. So in the past 5 years, God's done some amazing work at SBU. And we've seen this past year enrollment growth. In fact, I inherited a declining institution that had been on the decline for about a decade in a lot of different ways, not just in enrollment. And over the last 5 years, we've seen enrollment growth. The last 2 years, we've had some of the best years in the institution. This past year, we had our best giving year in the last decade or more. So more donors, more dollars, more students. But I'm really encouraged about what God is doing at the spiritual life of our institution and the growth that's taking place as an unapologetically Christ-centered university and what we're seeing happen in the spiritual life of our institution, which I'd love to talk about more.
Yeah, you've just mentioned how SBU is an unapologetically Christian university. What does that mean for a university to be unapologetically Christian, especially in an age when many institutions have drifted away from their founding convictions? I mean, obviously, look at the Ivy Leagues for the founding of our nation, were convictional Christian institutions, but have gone from the wayside. So how does SBU maintain a distinctly biblical worldview while preparing students for the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important when we talk about Christian higher education that it's important to define what we mean by Christian higher education. And for us at SBU, that means being unapologetically Christian, unapologetically Christ-centered. So we're a 148-year-old institution. We've been doing this work for a long time, but we are unapologetically about being a Christ-centered university, a Christian university. Some schools will literally say the C in our name doesn't stand for Christian anymore. And I think families need to be discerning when they're looking at institutions maybe that have been historically Christian or historically faith-based institutions. Many have drifted from that original calling and mission that they have as a university. In fact, interestingly enough, I was on Harvard's campus a few years ago, and there was a tour going on, and they're at the Harvard statue, and there's some Latin on the side of the Harvard statue, and someone says, so what's the Latin stand for? It's Veritas Christus et Ecclesia, and, truth for Christ and the church. And so he says, it's truth for Christ and the church. But he said it doesn't mean that anymore. And I thought to myself, well, it still means that. You just don't believe it. And I think for us, one of the reasons why we've been just really outspoken to say we're unapologetically Christ-centered, unapologetically Christian, unwavering in our Christian faith, we want people to know just from the onset, this is who we are, this is what we believe. Some things that we've done as an institution to strengthen that. When I came, we made certain that we clearly defined our faith statement as a Baptist Faith and Message 2000 and any new iteration of that. We also affirmed the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy and the Danvers Statement on biblical manhood and womanhood, as well as the Nashville Statement on sexual identity and biblical sexuality. So, those become framing documents for us. They become the guardrails for who we are. But also, if someone wants to know what we teach and why we teach it, those shape and understand all of our faculty and staff teach in accordance with, not contrary to. So when they come, they know and understand this is the framework of who we are. We're unapologetic on that. We're unwavering on that. And I think that sets us apart as a Christ-centered, and for us, a conservative, evangelical, Christ-centered university.
One thing that's really important that you mentioned is that it's a governing document for the whole institution, for staff, faculty. Obviously, some schools, the students might go back and forth, might not require them to necessarily sign that statement of faith, but they're at least knowing that their teachers and their faculty members or higher administration will be not just agreeing to those statements, but wholeheartedly holding those statements closely. And I think that's very important when you go to an institution, even if you're not going to go for a biblical studies degree, is that if you want to be a solid Christian believer in your community, in the workforce, you need to have those guardrails, even when you're studying business, even when you're studying political science. Moving forward, when parents seem to think about sending their kids off to college, a lot of them are concerned about sending their children into secular universities where their faith is often undermined. What evidence have you seen that a Christian university education actually forms their students differently, both intellectually, spiritually, than a secular institution would?
Yeah, and I think it dovetails to what you were just saying there a second ago. So for us, the integration of faith and learning is central to who we are. We believe in training and equipping the whole person to think Christianly. So how do we do that? How do we equip a student, whether, like you said, whether it's in a Bible class or whether it's a science class or it's an education class? In our Discover curriculum, we want all of our students to be able to understand a biblical worldview in every course that they take, shaped by and understand those guardrails of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, but most importantly, shaped by God's Word. Like we want our students to have a biblical worldview. When you think about secular education, one of the things that's very fascinating to me is a lot of people are like, if you go to a Christian institution, you're just going to get a Christian worldview. Well, that's not actually true. One of the things that happens at a Christian institution is we expose students to everything through the lens of a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview. So we want to basically give them a new lens, new ways to see, so that they see every topic, every subject, every perspective through the Bible, right? So we believe all truth is God's truth. It comes through the lens of a biblical worldview. However, when you go to a secular institution, that's not what you get. You get a very narrow-focused humanistic view that oftentimes is tearing down our Christian worldview. So, interestingly enough, my undergrad is actually at a state school. So I was a first-generation college student, Pell eligible student. I didn't know a lot about Christian higher education 40 years ago when I went to college. I went to a state university. By God's grace, I had a great experience. It was through a campus ministry that really helped shepherd me and shape me. But that wasn't happening holistically in the classroom, right? I mean, that was happening kind of in the parachurch side and a good local church. But what the university, oftentimes was certainly not building up my faith, sometimes even tearing down my faith or challenging my faith. So one of the things I believe that Christian higher education provides is a broad biblical worldview to help students know and understand all views, but to not be questioning what the biblical worldview of that particular view is. So we often say in the classroom, we want students to learn all views, but we want them to walk out of the room knowing exactly what the Bible teaches and exactly what they should understand and believe. Not indoctrinating them, giving them critical thinking skills to learn and understand, but helping them shape them, helping them understand through a biblical worldview. And for us, that integration of faith and learning to be seriously Christian, seriously academic, to go into the world, to make a difference in the world, we think that's the best outcome for education.
Even a few months ago, I was reading William F. Buckley's book, The God and the Man at Yale. And in that book, he mainly talks about the topic of academic freedom, and that conversation we might have a little further down today. But it's just so unimaginable about what the secular understanding of education. They try to, hey, yeah, we're all for academic freedom. It's a neutral classroom, but that's even furthest from the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important as Christian families are thinking about, any families are thinking about values-based education. And listen, we're supportive of all education. We think education lifts the tide in all different ways, but we really do value Christian higher education. I think there is a value proposition for higher education and thinking about Christian higher education. It surprises me how many families pay for K through 12 Christian higher education and then send their kids off to a school where potentially everything they just invested is going to be undermined. And there's a lot of statistics to actually show that. So, we want to be supportive of families that make different choices for different reasons, and there's good reasons to do so. But from a Christian perspective, Christian worldview, we really do believe you can have a seriously Christian, seriously academic, seriously great experience at a Christian university.
And of course, for those students who do go to public schools, there is a great opportunity for them to still grow in their faith at University of Arkansas, Mizzou, KU.
Absolutely,
It
absolutely.
depends on which school of that school it's a part of. So some business schools will be better than other business schools, or will be other, in comparison to that one institution. And then also, I mean, one thing I always encourage those in my church, especially the young men in my church and young women, is either as they're considering schools, if you're going to go to a state school, that's fine. But be sure when the first priorities you have is find local church community.
100%. Yes, absolutely. And we'll probably talk a little bit about the spiritual dynamic of a Christian higher education experience. And one of those is chapel. But one of the things we often say to our students, chapel is not church. Like,
Yep.
we want you to be plugged into a local church. We are a parachurch organization to the Missouri Baptist Convention, and we want to support the local church. We want our students to be engaged and involved in the local church, become members, serve in the local church. And we support that from day one. I mean, even in our welcome week, we bus our students to local churches for our Sunday service. We want them to be engaged and involved in a local church for sure.
Yeah, of course. I would be curious from your time in higher education and at SBU, how does Christian higher education equip students to be salt and light in the public square, in their communities, potentially when it comes to any sort of political level side of things? And then, do you have any examples you can either think of at SBU or some other place you've been at where you've seen how Christian education has uniquely equipped people to engage in their communities?
Absolutely. You and I talked about this just a few minutes before we started this podcast today. The importance of Christians being involved in their local communities and in the public square, I think, is a vital calling to every Christian. In a lot of ways, Christians have abdicated their role in our civic engagement, mostly because people say, well, there's this separation of church and government and church and state. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. The Christian voice needs to be involved in the civic engagement in the public square. So we want to equip all of our students, actually. So one of the ways I do that, I do a President's Leadership Fellows, a freshman. I meet with them every Monday night. Our spring break trip is actually to Washington, D.C. I help them engage and understand where policies are made. One of our former presidents, Roy Blunt, was a senator from the state of Missouri. In fact, I'm actually sitting in the office that he built where, when he was president at SBU, he went on to be a Missouri congressman and a Missouri senator. We meet with Senator Blunt. We saw and engaged with Senator Hawley's office while we were there, another one of our state senators, strong believer in Christian. That's engaging in civic life as a Christian with a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview, and shaping culture through the public square. So, whether that's at the local level of being involved in your school board or being involved in a local community group, or whether that's at state level or federal level, we want our students to be engaged and equipped and understand. Some of the other things we did while we're in D.C. helped them understand what the Heritage Foundation is and what the ERLC is, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, that we actually have advocates in D.C. They're actually doing work to help shape and understand policies that are coming down. One of the things we talk about to our students is however God calls you in whatever sphere of life, you don't have to be in Christian ministry to do Christian work in whatever sphere of life God calls you. Kind of an Abraham Kuyper understanding that, like, all opportunities, whatever sphere of life God calls you to, you can be involved in and be shaping the culture through policy making, getting upstream from culture to be able to make policies and to think about whatever vocation you're in, whether that's in business or education or healthcare or law, wherever you might be, going in that direction to shape culture downstream. So we shape all of our students to do that. We tell them, you are world changers. We're equipping world changers to go into the world to make a difference in the world for Jesus Christ.
And that made me think of two important things of why Christians need to be at least somewhat up to date with what's currently going on, and be equipped to engage in public square. So, firstly, is we live in a form of government that is of self-governance, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
We the people are the ones that are actually in charge of the government. It's it's the big part of the American idea. And if we want our idea, the American experiment, to continue to succeed, we need people to understand policies, understand politics, and understand the important things when it comes to how our government functions. So that's number one. And then number two, and I think a lot of times we've kind of neglected this a little way, is the pre-political issues, the family, education, community. And I think over the past 50 years, I'm sure you experienced it over your life, that there's people who live in a suburban neighborhood that don't even know their neighbors. Like that's not historically how we function as Americans, and number two, that's against God's design. We're supposed to live in relation with one another.
Yep.
And if Christians are able to be equipped in college to see the importance of community, whether even if they're of course, there's the unique part of the Christian community that is vital, but also having community with those around you. And I know at SBU that y'all do service projects and serve those in the community that perhaps don't know Christ. But we need to restore back the pre-political issues in our nation. We need to restore those back. And I think we'd actually see a lot more growth when it comes to us, one thing, getting along with each other when it comes to politics. But also I think that we could see a lot more human flourishing.
Without a doubt, I think maybe even part of the work that you're doing is really thinking about how are we making an impact in the world for the common good. And as Christians, that's part of our calling, is how do we impact our communities for good, and through the gospel and sharing the gospel, but also through living out the gospel. And we do that in lots of ways through service projects. One of the things at SBU, we're a Christ-centered, caring academic university that is preparing servant leaders to impact the world for Christ in a global society. That preparing servant leaders, we actually want our students to know and understand what it means to serve. And we do that by partnering with things like Convoy of Hope, which is in Springfield. We have them come to campus. We give out thousands of bags of groceries, but we also just do that in our community. We recently had Worldview Academy on campus for one of our summer camps. We'll have about 9 or 10 summer camps here, including Super Summer and Worldview Academy. Those students are actually going in and actually sharing the gospel in our community. So all of these opportunities to impact our communities at the local level, at the state level, are really important aspects of what it means to not just think Christianly, but live Christianly and live in a global society that we live in.
Yeah, it's been so beautiful to see over the past few years. I know my church has sent people out to the summer camp with the Missouri Baptist Convention, usually either in Hannibal or in Bolivar.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I know they enjoy it a lot. I think my church last year went to Bolivar, and so they had a lot of fun there. And that's a great thing about having those dorm rooms. They're able to use it, right?
Exactly.
And
yeah. We'll have hundreds of students every single week on campus during the summer. So our campus is just alive during the summer as it is during the school year. And in fact, a lot of our students will say, my first exposure to SBU, to Southwest Baptist University, was a summer camp, or something that I attended. We do Fuge camps, all of these camp opportunities. But those are really important aspects too, as you think about the student, the life cycle of a student, growing as a student, understanding what the options are. Like I said, I was a first generation college student. I didn't know a lot about Christian higher education when I was 18 years old thinking about higher education. I think today we've been able to, through our churches and equipping our students, to think about the opportunities when you're thinking about education and the value of education beyond high school. What are the opportunities that are there? And one of the things we've really focused on at SBU is creating an affordable educational opportunity that, like I said, is seriously Christian and seriously academic, so that students and families don't have to decide between public education and private education. We can be an affordable option as well.
I would love to put an experiment with you. So let's put our shoes into an 18, 17, 18-year-old student, and their parents are sitting down around the dinner table, talking about the next steps in their life. With all the growing skepticism toward higher education, the rising cost of it, as you just mentioned, the ideological indoctrination, the questions about the return on investment, how much is it actually worth to go to college? Why not I go to the technical school? Why not I just join a union and get educated there when it comes to being an electrician or being a plumber? How does a Christian university like SBU answer those concerns while still delivering academic excellence for those students?
Absolutely. One of the things I like to say is we're at a Christian university providing the workforce development laborers for the future. So whether that's in healthcare or education or business, a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to just choose the workforce development side. Well, that's actually the work that we do. We're preparing and equipping the next generation of employees for every sector of life. And there are some things we don't provide. There are some trades we don't provide education for, but the breadth, we have 100 different degrees, from associate's degrees all the way to doctoral programs in just about anything and everything that you can think about. But for me, the value isn't just learning a skill. When someone comes to a 4-year educational experience or a 3-year educational experience, whatever that looks like in their journey, that experience is more than just knowledge transfer. It's about whole person development. That student, that family is thinking about, how am I going to make an investment in my student for the next 3 or 4 years? And I can candidly say this is one of the greatest joys of being president. I watch a student come in as a freshman, and then I get to hand them a degree 4 years later as they walk across that stage as a completely transformed, different person. There's something that happens intrinsically during those 3 and 4 years that happens in the life of a student. And that relationship that takes place on campus, the integration of faith and learning, the relationship with faculty and staff that are pouring into them, that are mentoring them, that are shaping them, that student is growing and transforming exponentially during those 4 years. Now, listen, that could be done in lots of different contexts. There's lots of different support mechanisms that make that happen. But one thing that's unique, in my opinion, about Christian higher education is we provide a greenhouse environment where someone can grow, not in a protected monastery. We don't just come and cloister in away from the world. We want to actually be in the world, but not of it. But we want our students to have a safe environment where they can learn and grow, where they can be mentored. One of the things that I encourage people to look at is outcomes. I, as president, have the opportunity often to be able to write recommendation letters. And at SBU, when our students graduate, they almost always get their first pick choice, whether it's medical school, law school, dental school. And I'm writing these recommendations pretty regularly. And I know exactly what students want, what school they want to get in. And I'm always just super encouraged by what happens. Our students get to do research as undergraduate students. They get to do published research as undergrads. That's not typical in higher education. You go to most schools, it's graduate schools, doctoral programs where you're doing published research with faculty. But we actually have a hands-on, all of our faculty, our full-time faculty that are teaching with the student. We don't have a bunch of TAs. All of our professors you're going to get are right in the classroom. I actually teach a class in leadership for freshmen. We think it's important that 4-year experience, that transformational experience, isn't just about getting a skill. It isn't just about getting a degree. It's about really equipping someone for great jobs. Yes, we want them to get jobs. We want them to have great jobs, but we want them to have extraordinary lives. And part of that extraordinary lives is, one, understanding from a biblical worldview how God has shaped us, who we are, who God is, who we are, how that lens helps shape every decision. But it's also not just about one skill when you graduate. It's about the critical thinking skills and the communication skills and the life development skills, all of the soft skills in addition to the hard skills that a student learns that equips them as a lifelong learner for all of life. To me, that's the value proposition for Christian higher education.
No, that's very good. I mean, it made me think about at one of the big schools, you're in a lot of ways just a number. You're just one person extra on the enrollment sheet, and that is a hard thing. One thing for connections with faculty, connections for recommendations post graduation. Again, if you work diligently, you're going to get those relationships. But they're actually it's more easier to fall behind at a big state school because I'm sure someone's slacking off in class. Professors at like schools like SBU are going to be like, "Hey, is there anything going on in your life that I can help you out with?"
That's exactly right. We notice when a student is in class, we're able to text them, call them, follow up with them. We know our students by name. One of the things I say, if you come to SBU, you'll be known by name. I know almost of all of our students by name. If I don't know them by name, I know their relationship. I know where they're from. I know something about them. I work hard to learn every student's name. I think that's important. We want them to be known by name. We want them to be part of a family. In fact, we call it the SBU family, and your family members know your name, right? So we want students to be known by name. Our classes are small, and they're intentionally small because we want our students to be able to have interaction with their faculty member that's investing in their life in that transformational experience. You're not going to come to SBU and find a class of 300 students. Even in a large classroom, that has 20 or 40 or maybe even 50 students, the faculty member knows every single one of those students in there. They know when they're not there. They check in on them. They follow up in on them. And we just think that's really important. That's true whether you're in academics or co-curricular activities like athletics. We're a full formed university, so we have NCAA athletics, so there's 22 different sports that students can participate in. All of those kind of family environments we think are part of that important transformational experience that's happening. So we talked a little bit earlier about if a student comes to SBU, maybe doesn't know Christ or isn't necessarily committed to a particular faith statement. We do expect our students to live within a community and a set of principles and expectations. So they do have to sign a statement called Principles and Expectations. But if they don't know Christ, we want them to have repeated opportunities to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, why they're a student. That's going to happen in the classroom, outside the classroom. And if they are a Christian, we want them to grow in their relationship with Christ. And we think that that's really important, that there's a framework, again, that greenhouse. And the idea of the greenhouse is we're equipping them with deep roots so that then they can be planted when they go into a place, into a community, whether they move to Kansas City or whether they move to Dallas or Boston or Bangladesh. We want them to be equipped and ready to be planted wherever God calls them to make an impact for the world for Jesus Christ.
That's good. You just mentioned, the students that perhaps can't sign a particular statement of faith because, maybe they're not a believer yet, they're immature in their faith, or whatever the circumstance is there. And so as a president of SBU and those on your cabinet and, deans and other faculty members, how do y'all balance, as I mentioned earlier, academic freedom with fidelity to scripture and historic Christian orthodoxy, and also with y'all's particular statement of faith? I think y'all have 4 statement of faith. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the Baptist Faith and Message is our faith statement. It's shaped by those other 3 documents that I mentioned, Danvers, Nashville, and Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. So, when we think about faith statement as an institution, this is an important part of our hiring practice. So we hire every single faculty and staff member. I interview every single faculty and staff member that comes through the institution. Every coach that's going to be interacting with the student comes through the president's office. And I want to make sure that they are aligned with who we are, not just in our biblical convictions, but they are aligned in our faith statements, that they, like you said, joyfully affirm and agree to who we are, in addition to the same code of conduct that we expect for our students. So we want to live in a community together. Part of that community is that. So you mentioned academic freedom. And, kind of hearkening back on what I said a few minutes ago, when you think about academic freedom in an institution, we have full academic freedom. But one of the things I love about and we have an academic freedom statement you can actually read online. But one of the things I love about the Baptist Faith and Message when it talks about education is it talks about academic freedom and academic responsibility. So every faculty member has a certain level of guardrails, which they teach in accordance with, not contrary to our faith statement, which is the BFM, Baptist Faith and Message 2000. But they certainly have academic freedom within that. And again, one of the things that's important when a student comes to SBU, if they're in a classroom, even a New Testament class, and there's maybe 5 views on a particular topic, we want them to know and understand what are those 5 views. We want them to read about it. We want them to wrestle with it. We want them to come out of there using their critical thinking skills and their biblical worldview to understand what it is that they believe and why they believe that. But we don't want them to ever walk out of the room questioning, well, what in the world does the Bible say about this? Or what does SBU believe about this? We want them to know clearly what our convictions are. And we certainly want them to come alongside and believe in the same convictions we have. But that's not part of the educational experience. They don't have to graduate affirming the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. But we do hope that through their process, they'll learn and grow to love the same doctrinal commitments that we do as well.
Well, and that's the big difference between Christian higher education and any other higher education.
That's exactly right.
It's those guardrails. And so, do you want your child to study where there's the guardrails are totally arbitrary? It could one thing differ between professor, and we know that most likely those guardrails are going to be contrary to the scriptures. And again, I think that Christians still can thrive in there. There's a part of me that, and maybe it's the argumentative side of me that would love to be in that environment more, and so there are some students that could thrive in there. But I think it's an important consideration for students and parents is what is going to be best for my child. And then
Yes.
one thing I forgot to mention, even when we talk about the smaller class sizes, people are going to know generally everyone on campus, at smaller Christian schools, and obviously SBU is one of the bigger ones. But most Christian schools are not having 30,000 students there, right?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, schools like our side, in the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 range are schools of the size that you're going to generally know everyone on campus. You're going to have a good sense of community and feel of community. And having that opportunity to be in an environment where, again, you are known by name, we think that's really important. We think that's important to the shaping of who the person is as they come. We want them to be part of a family while they're there. One of the things I love about our particular mission statement, I said earlier, we're a Christ-centered, caring academic community. I think we're one of the few schools, Christian schools, that actually has in their mission statement the word caring. We really care, and we want to be part of a caring academic community. We want that community to be a sense in which someone comes and they feel cared for, and we don't think that's just living out our Christian faith. We think that's living out the biblical worldview that God has called us to do.
And then even thinking about post graduation, you're going to have those close friends and fellowship. I mean, I have countless people I know who've graduated from Christian school, including SBU, that they see each other like once a year. They go on vacation with each other.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are opportunities that you can have at state schools, but it seems uniquely at Christian schools, those are very important relationships. And then also even thinking professionally, the alumni networks that you're going to have when you're at a smaller liberal arts Christian school that has that community sentiment is that you're going to have people who are going to be successful businessmen, successful
Absolutely, yes.
engineers, and you just don't know what in 20 years it's going to look like. Hell, you're going to know somebody who's a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That happens all the time
No
at
doubt about
small
it.
Christian schools.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I was on a call yesterday actually with a former student that I had probably 10 years ago in my class. And we touch base probably, 2 or 3 times a year. And we were on a call and just chatting about life and business and the work that he is doing. I was in Nashville. Again, a student probably 10 years ago at a previous institution that was one of our students, happened to be an athlete that we got to know, and he and his wife were both students there. I was in their home having dinner. Those kind of relationships and those kind of things do continue, and it's really sweet because it's sweet communion with other believers in different states and different cities on telephone, Zoom calls, whatever they might be, where you're able to continue that. And again, I think there's a lot of platforms in which that can happen, but the environment of Christian education where you're linked together and locked together in a similar pursuit of Christ. You've learned together. You've shared the same experiences together. I think that does shape you for life. And we definitely see that at SBU as well. Other institutions I've been at, Christian education, where there are groups that graduated together that continue to do life together literally for decades. And I can almost always tell someone graduating in the 60s, I can throw out a couple of the names. They're like, oh yeah, we know John, or throw it for someone from the 80s or the 90s at any institution I've been at, and that's a pretty sweet community.
No, that definitely is. You mentioned this earlier. What exactly does the spiritual and character formation at SBU look like beyond the chapel services? How are you intentionally shaping students' hearts and minds to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and also to love their neighbor as themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where Christian higher education really thrives. It's whole person development. We want our students to think Christianly. And in thinking Christianly, we want them to have a lens to do that, so a biblical worldview to do that. And that's in everything that we do. That's in the classroom. That's in our co-curricular activities. That's doing what we call intentional discipleship. We want all of our students to be involved in some kind of discipleship. And, there's everything offered at a place like SBU. There's hall Bible studies. There's FCA. There's intentional discipleship through our discipleship groups, and they're pretty serious discipleship groups. I mean, they're not just hang out together and watch a movie. They're really studying God's word together, accountability in one another's life, and making a difference in each other's lives. And I think it's through that deep discipleship that takes place again in the classroom, outside of the classroom, where we see the kind of transformation that takes place in the life student and in the lives of students. And what it encourages me is chapel then becomes the barometer of what is happening in the life of the institution. So we gather together Monday and Wednesday. And I'll just be candid with you. When I first got to SBU, now in fairness, it was post-COVID, but students could do a lot of things to get chapel credit that did not include going to chapel. And I changed that. I said, listen, we're going to have a simple mechanism. You get chapel credit when you actually show up in this room that we call chapel. We invested in a great worship team and great speakers to come from internal speakers, external speakers. We've hosted lots of great folks, people and it's really been a joy. But that barometer of change for me is seen when I first got there, a small number of students sitting in the back till today, it's just packed and students literally fight for the front row seats. When I first got there, the only person that sat in the front was me. Now I can't even find a seat in the front. Our football team, I'll just give a good example of this. This is just, to me, these are huge things. When I first got there, the football team, you would see kind of in the back corner. Today, the football team literally sits on the front row to the left. And to me, these are just huge things. And these are students with their notebooks, their Bibles open, engaged in the Word of God, engaged in what's happening through worship, that they love the experience. I often say we want chapel to be something, it is required, but we want it to be something that is desired. And I can truly say our students will really want to be part of the chapel experience. To me, that's the biggest spiritual life change in the life of an institution, is what happens in the chapel. And to see that, to experience that. So, one of the things I want to encourage people, seeing is believing. So come to SBU, come visit us on chapel Monday or Wednesday at 10 a.m. See what's happening in the life of our institution, because that's the biggest impact of the true impact of spiritual life on our campus.
That's so beautiful. I can't express how much it actually warms my heart hearing that. And so we talked a little bit beforehand, but I started at SBU, and it was very much of what you're articulating. And that's not to speak ill of the former administration. Of course, there's higher education and administration overall. It's difficult. It's not easy. When people criticize other administrators, it's like, you understand you're dealing with people that have their own ways and mindset, and it's very difficult. But that really warms my heart that you have the football team at the front. Talk about that's a sign of spiritual mature campuses. That is a good thing, and so I'm really encouraged by that. I'd like to ask you the question, looking ahead 10 to 20 years, the current students there, what kind of graduate does SBUs, through being a Christian higher education institution, need to produce to strengthen the church and renew the culture? What specific qualities or skills are you prioritizing to instill at students at SBU?
Yeah, it's hard to know what 10 to 20 years looks, but I can tell you, I think it's the same core values that we believe today. So in our Discover curriculum, our general education curriculum, we call it our Discover curriculum. We're really a student-first organization, student-first university. We want every decision we make to be about students. So, in our curriculum, our Discover curriculum is helping our students discover their God-given talents and abilities and calling. We want to shape them in that calling to prepare them and equip them on whatever vocation that God is calling them. We want them to have great jobs, but we want them to have extraordinary lives, as I said earlier. And those lives are shaped and impacted by the kind of person that they're becoming. And we want them to become the person that God has called them to become, and shaping them to become that world changer to go out in the world. So the same skills today that we're equipping them for are probably the same skills in 10 to 20 years that we want to shape them to be when they actually graduate and go into the world, right? So we want them to be lifelong learners. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be good communicators. Most importantly, we want them to love God's word. We want them to bleed the Bible. One of the things we do just as a regular rhythm during the week is we read scripture together. We memorize scripture together. We have something called the fighter verse that we actually include in chapel. So when our students graduate, they will have heard scripture every single week of their life. They get that in the classroom. They get it in their extracurriculars. They get it in co-curriculars. And we're memorizing those things together. We're meditating on scriptures together. Romans 12:1-2 says, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We want students that go into a world not to be shaped and conformed to the world that they go into, but actually be the ones that are shaping the world that God has called them into. And whatever sphere of life God calls you to, one of the things I love about a place like SBU is we're preparing educators and health professionals and business leaders and pastors and lawyers, all of those spheres, all of those vocations that God calls us into, we want to shape those students in such a way that they are equipped and ready to go into the world, to go into culture and to help shape culture as world changers. And we do that with the good news of Jesus Christ. And we think that's the greatest news that there is. And we want to equip our students to do that. So I don't think that's going to change. There are lots of things that will change. The world will change significantly. AI is changing the world even today. There are ways in which technologies will change. We've seen that even through the last 30 years, whether it's the advent of the internet or whether it's AI or whatever that might be. Those things will continue to change. But the human interaction of life on life, the God calling, the calling that God has placed on us to live our lives in pursuit of Christ and for the good of humankind doesn't change. And we do that through the mechanism of the church. We want to equip our students to be good and faithful church members and ultimately good and faithful citizens, bringing good to their communities.
One final question I have for you. For parents, pastors, and young people listening who are discerning where to invest in higher education, what would you say is the unique value proposition of a Christian university education like the one that's offered at SBU?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked a lot about, throughout the thread of this. Education is expensive, and there's a lot of criticism around education and the value proposition of education, the return on investment of education. One of the things again that I've tried to emphasize is that we provide an affordable, academically excellent education that's seriously Christian, seriously academic. So you don't have to trade off. I think a lot of times people think, well, a Christian school, that's a Bible school. I need a real education. No. A Christian higher education experience is seriously Christian, but it's also seriously academic. I'll just give you a good example of this. When our health professionals, our nurses, for example, when they graduate, 100% of our BSN students pass the NCLEX. That's our national licensure exam on the very first time. 100%. So the quality of education doesn't have to be compromised just because it's a Christian institution. And in history, we've probably seen that happen in different places. But I can tell you today that the institutions that are seriously Christian, seriously academic, are producing great outcomes. So you don't have to trade off that to say, well, I have to go to a more elite school in order to have a better education. It's actually not true. In fact, I would say we have data to support that. I think the second thing when they're thinking about kind of the ROI or that return on investment really is, again, continuing their values in the life of a partnership of education. And it is a partnership, by the way. An education of a student, whether it's a traditional student or a non-traditional student, is a partnership. There's a lot of people that come to the table to make that happen. There's a lot of faithful people in the past that have actually helped support SBU, that allows SBU to continue today through things like endowment gifts and things like current gifts and people that have paid for buildings and all those kind of things. We've tried to make our costs very affordable by reducing the tuition expense. About the average financial aid for a student is about $29,000 of additional financial aid. So a financial aid package, which makes an educational experience very affordable for most families. And there's just a lot of ways that provide that pathway for a student. So again, students don't have to pick and choose whether or not they're going to a state school or to a private school, public Christian school based on cost. We can become very, very close in those costs. So that's really not where the decision is made. The decision is really made about what type of experience you want your student to have, what type of outcomes you want them to have, and what kind of person you want them to become when they walk across that stage in 4 years. And I can candidly say, because I watch it every day, Christian higher education is producing the kind of graduates today, and I believe in the future. We've been doing this for 148 years to continue that mission and that work of producing world changers to impact the world for Jesus Christ. And I love that. That gets me up every day. That excites me in the work that I'm doing. And it's been a joy to talk about it because I'm just so encouraged by what's happening at SBU. I'm encouraged by what's happening in the larger environment. I actually said this just a few weeks ago on a panel discussion. While I don't know that we can definitely say there's a spiritual awakening, like maybe of the same era that we would say of Edwards or Whitefield, but I do see there's something happening in the life of college students right now that is a spiritual renewal. And I'm super encouraged about that because I think that's going to impact our nation as these students go out and actually make a difference.
Well, one last thing to comment on. You can go to any school and you can get equipped to be an engineer, to be a nurse, to pass the NCLEX. to get prepared to be a lawyer, to take the LSAT afterwards, and go to perhaps the law school of your dreams, right? But unfortunately, where education stands as it is now, primarily where they're training people and their students to cultivate virtues is at Christian higher education
Absolutely.
institutions, and that's what we need to bring back. I mean, if you read anything before the 20th century, even a little bit of the 20th century, but especially beforehand, that was the primary means of education, was to cultivate virtues alongside of equipping people to think critically and to maybe become an expert on a field. We've specialized way too much on a lot of things. And again, specialization, it's a good thing. We should do it. But it's those everybody. That's the reason why we have general education core classes, right? That's why we have them, is to equip them to think more broadly, but also to be able to help them think more critically and cultivate virtues. And so, thank you, Dr. Melson, for joining me. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, Harrison, it's been a real joy to be with you. And if anyone's interested in SBU, www.sbuniv.edu, SBU University, we're really excited and proud of what God is doing here. And thank you for letting me talk about Christian higher education. Thanks for letting me talk about SBU, the school that we love and the school that we serve. And may God bless you and your work. And I would just ask that as your listeners listen, one of the things I encourage people to pray for Christian education, Christian educators, pray for wisdom, discernment, and God's favor on our institutions. We do need more Christian higher education in this country, and we do need more people of virtue, as you said, Harris, and I couldn't agree more. So it's been a joy to be with you today.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Melson.
Okay, thanks so much. Take care.